So Tom Aspinall had a very interesting interview with Piers Morgan. He talks about the Jon Jones fight and how Dana wants the fight as well. He talks about his mentality going into a fight. He talks about his best skill sets and stuff like that. He said that Jon Jones is a cheat because he tested positive for PEDs, although he said he didn't think Jones took steroids. But Jones tested positive for turinabol, which is an anabolic androgenic steroid. Although he still believes that Jon Jones is elite, like one of the best fighters we've ever seen and all that stuff, but he said he doesn't care about that because it's not about Jones' legacy. It's about who is the best heavyweight right now. And I 100% agree with Tom Aspinall. Very, very interesting interview. And they punched the bag together. Tom Aspinall's got a terrifying punch. Bro swings so fast, it's insane. And Piers Morgan hit it pretty good too.
We maybe negotiate a little bit, and he literally walked into the room and said, "It's happening." And I said, "Well, he's going to want loads of money." And he said, "I know, but it's happening." And he said it's going to be the biggest fight in UFC history.
He says he wants fuck you money. I imagine Dana will pay him fuck you money, won't he?
I would imagine so. I mean, I can't speak for Dana, but I would
you
imagine
get
so.
fuck you money?
No.
How much would you get for that fight?
I don't really care about money at this point. I mean, obviously, I've got a family. I want to make as much money as I can. But to me, what's more important is unifying the belts. See, in MMA, it's a little bit different to boxing in the aspect of you have different weight divisions, which is very like boxing, of course. But usually you have one champion, one face, one name of every division. Now, in the heavyweight division right now, there's two. And I don't want there to be two because I feel like I'm the number one. Jon obviously feels like he's the number one. And let's fight about it. It's not that difficult. Jon often likes to talk about legacy and his history and all this stuff. It's not about Jon. It's about the belt. And I want to be the unified champion. So for me, it's not so much about money.
So you heard it right there. Dana is implying that he's going to pay Jon Jones what he wants to fight Tom Aspinall, and what he says is the biggest fight in UFC history. Now, what other excuse does Jon have? Glad to see that the fight is most likely going to happen unless it's only on Jones, right? If it doesn't happen, it's because Jon Jones doesn't want it to happen. Dana's willing to give him the money. Tom, of course, wants to fight. The fans want to fight. The only person here that can make the fight happen now is Jon Jones. And maybe that's what he's waiting for. Maybe he wants to be the deciding guy. If Jones doesn't fight Tom Aspinall now, as we've been saying it from the very beginning, it's the biggest duck in UFC history by arguably the greatest fighter of all time, which is a very unique thing because most all-time greats don't duck the biggest challenges in their sports. When we look at Michael Jordan, when we look at Cael Sanderson, and even some of the best boxers like Muhammad Ali, the greatest athletes in the world do not duck the biggest challenges. And the biggest challenge in Jon Jones's career right now is Tom Aspinall, the interim heavyweight champion. And honestly, the heavyweight champion who's doing the thing that they should be doing, defending the belt against the number one contender. He fought Curtis Blades, Jones fought Stipe. And I'm so glad that Dana is saying now, this is the fight he wants to do. Now, him saying it's going to be the biggest fight of all time, I don't think so, because Brock Lesnar at UFC 100 might be the biggest heavyweight fight ever. I don't think there's a heavyweight fight that can beat those numbers. It was like 1.6 million pay-per-view buys, which is absolutely insane, right? They have GSP on the card and all that stuff, but if Dana thinks it'll be bigger than Brock Lesnar, that's kind of crazy, right? Because Jon Jones is not as big as Brock, but maybe it built up enough hype with this whole Tom Aspinall thing to make it a truly special fight, because Dana is so on board with this fight now, whereas before he really wasn't. And it's like, what changed? Well, the people want to see the fight, but they've always been wanting to see the fight, and they did make the fight even bigger. Never would we have heard Tom Aspinall's name ringing through the audience in the press conference like that, or people cheering Tom Aspinall after the Jones and Stipe fight was over when they showed Tom on the screen. Maybe they promoted this fight a different kind of way than what they usually do, but if the fight happens, great. That's all that we want to see. And I do think it will be one of the biggest fights of all time. And we look at the skills, the athleticism, the size of the opponent, the finishing ability of the opponent, all that stuff. This will be the most dangerous fight in Jon Jones's entire career, and one of the biggest fights that he's ever had, in the sense that Tom is one of the biggest challenges. You can even argue he is the most challenging opponent for Jon Jones. When you take all of those into fruition, when you look at the size of him, he's bigger than everybody else that Jones fought. He has one-punch knockout power. He has a speed advantage. He's very athletic. He has great movement, great footwork. This is the guy that a lot of people would think could beat Jon Jones. And as fans, that's all we want to see, man. We want to see the champion fight the number one contender.
I'm not like the most scared guy in the room.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But
that's fascinating, really.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But is that fear, or is it adrenaline stroke apprehension of making a mistake?
Well, probably all of it. But the fear fuels me to do what I'm doing.
Keeps you on the right edge.
Keeps me super sharp. Without fear, I'm like nothing. I think fear can do two things to you. It can either destroy you or it can help you. And I've figured out a way to let it help. Like without that, I'm nothing. I'm absolutely nothing. I can't go and do what I do in front of millions of people. Like I need the fear to be able to. And the bigger the occasion, the bigger the opponent, the more scared I am. And generally speaking, the better I do.
As you walk towards the octagon, what do you feel?
I'm just trying to, like, every time I do it now, it's like a step closer to never doing it again. I'm aware that I'm on like the second half of my career now.
Now that's interesting. That's a similar mindset that Georges St. Pierre used to have. When they asked GSP, are you afraid of fighting? He said he was afraid to death of fighting. He said he hated fight days more than anything else. It kind of fuels him. It makes him a better fighter. It makes him sharper out there. It's exactly what Tom is saying. Tom says the more afraid he is of his opponent, the better he does in his fights. And against Sergey Pavlovich, that's why you saw such a spectacular knockout like that. And he didn't even train for the fight. He said he had a back injury and all that sort of stuff. Took the fight on 2 weeks' notice and beat him quickly in the first round.
Big, scary Russian guy. So there was that. There was also the fact I didn't really train for the fight. I took it on 2 weeks' notice. I didn't know if the fight was going to happen because I didn't have a US visa. Also, like the second day of training, I injured my back. So I basically didn't train for the fight at all. So it was just like the relief of everything.
And it's crazy to think that a heavyweight like Tom Aspinall is finishing opponents within like a minute. He has the shortest average fight time in UFC history, and he's the most scared out of any of the fighters. It's crazy to think that if Tom had the gladiator mentality, he might not be the fighter that he is. Because evolutionarily, fear is a survival mechanism. It causes a fighter to hit the fight or flight mode. And Tom uses that to eliminate the other fighter with all of the skills that he has. I think it doesn't work for most fighters. That's why you see most fighters have that gladiator mindset in accepting to quote unquote kill or die instead of fighting out of fear, which is to fight not to die, survive at all costs. And Tom's survival is not to be defensive, but to use his skills to the best of his abilities in a flawless performance of eliminating his opponent in the octagon without being hit. Fighters like Vanderlei Silva know that they are going in a war and will be hit many times. They accept that. It's a different mentality. Tom doesn't do that. Tom gets in there to defeat his opponent without being hit. And nobody explains this better than GSP. He said that there is no courage without fear. He believes that most fighters are afraid who get in there.
I'll be honest with you, 100%. I never like to fight. I despise fight day. It's unbearable for me. Extremely uncomfortable. And not knowing if I will be hurt, humiliated, I'm afraid. And then I realized that I should not be afraid to admit that I'm afraid. You know, there's no courage without fear. And when I made peace with it, I knew it was a normal thing and I learned how to control it. That's why there's some guys, I think, they fake it so hard and they don't make peace with it. And when the light is on and it's time to perform, they crumble. You see that very often in combat sport. Guys that are very good in the gym, but then when it's time to go, they don't perform as well. You're like, what's going on, you know? Because they don't know how to domesticate their fear. Kasamoto, the Mike Tyson coach, he says, fear is like fire. It can help you cook your food, but it can also burn you if you don't know how to control it.
It kind of defeats that whole old school mentality of you can't be afraid of who you're fighting, right? Because it'll just make it worse for you or whatever, which can be true, right? As Tom Aspinall said, being afraid can destroy you or it can make you sharper. It just depends on the person. There are some fighters out there, if they were afraid, it would make them fight less optimal. It'll make them cover up more when they get hit and all that stuff. They couldn't take a good shot. They'll go to the ground. But then there's fighters who become sharper, better fighters, better finishers, almost like a cat in the corner kind of thing, you know? If you corner a cat, they fight for their life and they're way more dangerous that way. That's kind of how Tom is going to keen all of his senses. He's going to try to win the fight with the best of his abilities because he has to. So him and Georges St. Pierre have that similar kind of mindset. And it's funny too because both of them are very well-rounded. As you can see from, if you watch the Tom Aspinall interview, he's very calm and kind, doesn't take himself too seriously outside of the octagon. He's very honest and all that sort of stuff, right? It's very similar to Georges St. Pierre. They have like a similar kind of personality, clear thinking, in a sense, which helps them focus on everything in the sport to become the most well-rounded they could possibly be. And they both have that fear trigger in a fight, where the more scared they are, the better they perform. It's very different than what we're usually hearing from other fighters, where it's like, I'm not afraid of anyone, I want to get in there, I like getting punched in the face, and when my face gets cut open and stuff, I fight even harder and all that. You know, it's like, it's a difference from the gladiator mindset that you hear from like Max Holloway, for an example. Max is not scared of anybody. He goes in there like a gladiator does. Robbie Lawler, perfect example. example. Because the thing about the gladiators, even though some in history were afraid, in fact, some of them even unalived themselves before getting into the arena, they were trained and taught to never fear any opponent in the arena, whether it be another human or it be an animal. They say the main things that the gladiators feared were their masters, not the actual person that they were fighting or the animal that they were fighting. It would definitely happen, but it's different than in MMA. For example, like in MMA, you're not taught to not be afraid. You're not taught to suppress your fears and stuff like that, like the gladiators were. They were specifically trained to never fear, ever, because they were expected to die in the arena. But when they did, they had to die with dignity, honor, and with no fear, because they weren't themselves. They were essentially all slaves, right? They were property of their master, so they could not dishonor their masters by showing fear. And just a bit of fun fact with the whole gladiator thing, because there is a misconception about the gladiators and their mental state going into the arena. Now, most of them were fearless, right? Most of them did not fear their opponents, they did not fear getting killed in the arena and stuff like that, because they were prepared to do so. In fact, it was expected that they would die in the arena. It was not expected for them to live. Most of them were dying in their 20s. And there was a reward for freedom for these guys, but it was very rare. But the thing that they did fear was their master. All the gladiators essentially had a master that ruled over the gladiator schools, and if they wanted the gladiator to do anything, they would have to do it. They have to obey, right? So that's like the whole different aspect compared to today when we say gladiator mindset. I think when people say gladiator mindset, it's the fearlessness in the cage or in the ring for boxing or whatever it is, rather than all the aspects of being a gladiator, right? Which is not great. Most people do not want to actually be a gladiator. Oh, well, I can't say none of them. I'm sure there are some fighters that would have loved to fight in the arena in front of all the audience and they become celebrities and stuff like that, because it did happen a few times. There were a few gladiators that did become celebrities, and there were even gladiators that refused the reward of freedom so they can fight in the arena even more because they loved the lifestyle. But the only ones that loved that lifestyle were the ones that were the best at it. If you were just good, you absolutely were not loving that lifestyle. You had to be the absolute best. I almost forgot this isn't Trails of Steel. Dude, I was going to keep going with the gladiator history, but I think few of the MMA fighters have that same kind of mentality where this is who they are. They want to keep fighting as long as they can. No fear. They embrace the chaos in the octagon. And as some of them say, they become alive in that cage. They become alive when they're fighting one-on-one with another elite fighter. And I think Tom Aspinall would even tell you he is not one of those kind of guys. So whereas some fighters like Max, Vanderlei, and Robbie have that fearless gladiator mindset, Aspinall and GSP are more like tacticians, and a mindset like that can get a fighter very far in the sport. Both can, right? Both. But this is a unique kind of mindset in MMA. You don't hear a lot of fighters have that same kind of thought. I think Donald Cerrone may be another one. Wasn't Donald Cerrone I think Donald Cerrone says something kind of similar to Tom Aspinall, but he did have some fights where he froze up in there, right? For example, when he fought RDA, he had his first title fight, and it looked like the bright lights got to him, and he didn't really do anything. Got TKO'd in like 45 seconds. So that's not a thing with George and Tom, because they're at the top. They're at the pinnacle of the sport. They are champions who are still fighting that same way and fighting better than ever. The brighter the lights get, the more difficult the opponent gets, the scarier the opponent gets, the better that they fight. Even at the championship level, which is different with Donald Cerrone. Donald Cerrone fights better against fighters that he's friendly with, and they get along and stuff like that, and the stakes weren't as high. Cowboy did so much better when the stakes were low. You could see the difference of his performances from the non-title RDA fight to the title RDA fight. So it is a bit different than Tom and George. There might be another fighter I can't remember, but these two are just different. These two have a different mentality than the other fighters in the UFC.
What's your strongest thing, do you think?
Doing everything really well together.
The whole thing.
I'm not the best boxer in the world. I'm not the best grappler in the world. I'm not the best wrestler in the world. I've not got the best fitness in the world. I'm not the strongest guy in the world. But put it all together, and as a collective, I do that as good as anybody.
And you hear it from Tom right there. Piers Morgan asks him, what do you do best in MMA? What aspect of martial arts are you at your best? Tom said, none of them. I do all of them together. That's that same mentality. Even though I think his boxing is probably the best part of his game, or, his jiu-jitsu is really good too. But there isn't one area of Tom Aspinall where you're thinking, oh, he's just so much better in this area than everything else. Like, for an example, with Wonder Boy, he's a much better striker than he is a grappler. Or Anderson Silva was a much better striker, Muay Thai skills than he was a Brazilian jiu-jitsu fighter. Or with like Sean Strickland, he was a much better boxer than he is a grappler. Well, they say in the training room that his grappling is really good, but in the fight, obviously his boxing's much better. But Tom is good at everything. He truly is. He has great boxing. He's got great kicks, specifically leg kicks. He's got great wrestling. He's got great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I would say his Jiu-Jitsu is better than his wrestling, and his boxing is better than his kickboxing. But he is truly a heavyweight who focuses on getting better at everything to become a complete mixed martial artist. And the best fighter he can possibly be is by being that well-rounded.
It weren't bad, actually. I was expecting worse.
Come on, up you go.
That weren't bad.
That's not a bad punch from Piers Morgan. Now I see why he's so confident on his political shows.
Still got it. I've still got it.
Holy shit.
You look at the comparison of Tom punching that thing. Can you imagine eating that punch? Bro, I feel bad for Sergey Pavlovich. He took a punch like that. Now I see why Jon Jones doesn't want to fight him. Did you guys ever see the power cube with Tom punching it? And it got like 40,000 or whatever. Alex Pereira got like 100 and something thousand over even Francis Ngannou. There's no way Tom punches that much weaker on the power cube. Now the numbers on the punching machines, the results of it don't mean anything. Unless you're like hitting it the exact same, at the exact same angle so it doesn't move out laterally too much. If you're hitting it straight in and it goes linear into like the socket, the score becomes a lot more accurate, but not everybody punches it with that kind of precision. So in fact, it's a lot more precision than it is about how hard you hit it. But there's no doubt Tom Aspinall has to be one of the hardest punchers we've ever seen in the UFC. It's crazy how hard this guy hits. But great interview from Tom Aspinall. Piers Morgan always doing a good job. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did, make sure to give the video a like, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video.